Okay, I see we're recording. Let's get started. So welcome everybody to the meeting. I think we had one item that a group member wanted to discuss. Do you want to just take over and get into it? We're talking about kernel tuning for
Yeah, okay, then I will take it over right now. I thought it would be a nice idea if we work towards from the white paper that this group has been published during the summer period last year. So it would be nice if we start or at least work on a set of best practices for how to tune a kernel for an edge device. Right now, basically the problem is either we are focusing on security or we are focusing on throughput. So the combination of both has not been addressed somehow. And at some point I would like to start working in this direction to basically make or write a set of best practices that we can basically embed in any embedded device, independent if it's just a sensor or if it's an embedded device that does some steering of a human-related, I would say, entity. The entity could be, for example, a metro station or a Tesla car. And yeah, I think this would be a nice idea somehow.
Okay, what sorts of open source projects are already out there that touch on this? I think there are projects that involve building customized kernels, and then is the Balena OS something along these lines of an implementation of one?
Also basically I started to work towards from the research direction. I found out that there is already this CIS benchmark tool that has a special section for, I think, Red Hat kernels. However, this is strictly focused, as I said previously, on security. And I found out that there is also some sort of Cloudera, I would say, white paper at some point that is focusing on the throughput. And as I said, it's now at some point time to merge both worlds and say, okay, this is the break-even point from both. But I've not made a concrete deep dive research. I just made, I would say, 1 to 2 hours. So I think there could be some plenty of resources and ideas still out there.
Does anybody else on the call have experience with this or heard of anything?
I have, so not personal experience, but I have some friends working in robotics and Edge. I guess this is part of Edge in some sense. The problem that these guys had was how to handle. So the robotics that they had special hardware that required special special drivers for the kernel. So I was trying to convince them to look into Kubernetes, and the issue that they were seeing is how would they handle updates of kernels in a setup that they don't really control. Like, let's say they ship a new version of their software. How would they manage also the updates of the drivers when a new kernel comes out and compiling all these, the entire stack? I don't know if it's related, but I don't see the kernel being a problem only on day 1, but day 2 and you know, maintaining your own custom kernel is always a problem the second day. Like, how do you manage it? You update it, drivers, stuff like that.
Okay, I just put a link in the chat and in the notes for this thing. I don't have any personal experience. Well, I guess I do with a little bit. I did put this thing on my Pi because it came along with a home automation system that would happen to be running on this Balena OS, but it is described as a customized OS intended for embedded devices, but capable of running containers. So it would seem to have a good intersection of this embedded use case potentially with Kubernetes. It just says it runs containers, so that doesn't mean that it would host running Kubernetes clusters on this OS, but it would seem like it might be in a position to interact well. I believe the Balena OS has features that allow over-the-air updates too. Does anybody have any experience or heard of anything related to this?
Right now not, but I will dig into the material from Balena OS.
I do have some familiarity with it, and I think you're correct. There are some operating system level things that you can update and manage. There's another thing that I wanted to mention. I don't think it's been discussed here yet, but there's an Eclipse project called Eclipse Hawkbit that is designed for delivering whatever artifact you want out to any environment. So, perhaps updating a driver on something like an IoT gateway and having the ability to verify that the new artifact is intact and all of that stuff. The implementation, though, on actually updating the driver, or in this case, it could be a kernel module, that actually is up to you, though. So it's a great pathway, but you would have to have an OS with the components in order to know what you wanted to update and what you wanted to protect against updating and so on. So that's a pathway, but it's not a fully integrated OS management or anything.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting thing to consider. It's just not tuning the kernel or getting a kernel, but realistically, even as these kernels get small, they have security issues discovered, and ultimately many people find that the day 2+ management is the big part and the big cost of the decision compared to just the initial choice of what you put out there, I think.
There's another part of this that I think would be worth discussing here, since the topic is open, and thanks to Bernhard for bringing all of this up. I think it's really actually important. Let's say you do have an OS version that you trust, that is a minimized kernel, and it's locked down. You put it out there, and you do need to make an update to it. If you were doing any form of attestation, like you had a secure boot and a signal around that, after you make an update, do you also have the ability to update your expected results from attestation? So it's kind of like, what's your trusted channel for delivering some update and verifying that update got through without sneaking in some backdoors and things like that, right? So I think it's a really challenging topic, because usually the OS is what we trust as being the thing on top of which all of our other stuff can ride and communicate. And so basically, how do you change the guard and verify that the new guard isn't corrupt?
Yeah, I'm going to put another thing in chat that I think is relevant too, and that's Yocto. So I think this is not an embedded kernel itself, but it's a tool for you to generate your own.
I would also suggest people to look at the Fedora IoT. So it's outside my realm of expertise, but I think it's a project that could also play into this.
Okay. Maybe you can put a link to that in the
Yeah.
chat, or I can. I'll just have to
So-
search for it.
Should be the fit the same requirements. So yeah.
So is
Process-
Fedora IoT is one, it's not like Yocto where you're sort of building your own, but it is one where the choices got made for you and somebody else built it, right?
Yeah.
It might be interesting as a future talk to just put some of the, if somebody is already looking at these as a project, to have a presentation comparing them in a table or something of, what, there's all kinds of issues here of security aspects, including updates, what size they are, whether, assuming these are Linux kernels, whether it's at all plausible that you'd run Kubernetes nodes on it. There's likely to be such a thing as reducing it so much that isn't practical. I think we've talked in this group that even if you can't run Kubernetes nodes, but you can run containerized workloads, maybe there are ways to use the Kubernetes control plane to at least manage things related to it, so that it would be often technically not a Kubernetes hosted workload, but something that you could still manage, either with CRDs or some other mechanism of your choice. I see Yin of FutureWay is on the call, and maybe with KubeEdge you've encountered some calls for customized kernels. Do you have any knowledge of something like that?
No, we haven't touched in the low-level OS issue. We're still on the application layer to management the resource. That's actually a really interesting topic.
I guess it's possible too that we could discuss updating, like having a specialized kernel and then updating it as part of a discussion that we're doing over at Eclipse, which is we're gathering requirements for what is like a universal superset of commands that you would need to execute to manage remote gateways. And Dan, I see you're shaking your head. Yes, like this would be, that actually, I hadn't thought about it, but that might actually be a good set of commands to include in that list. So obviously we don't have anything to share yet, but when that is completed, we could definitely share it over here, or we could have a discussion over here as the list progresses. But the basic idea is you need to do things that are common to whatever the underlying hardware might be. And those things are everything from, remotely rebooting the box to being able to update some part of the user space file system like binaries. So, I guess I hadn't thought of it, but all the way down to updating the changing the kernel itself. And if there were a common set of commands, then how you implement them would determine kind of the quality level of your product. But if you implemented, all of them or all of like the main ones, you would be, you would have an attractive edge OS. Or the set of binaries that come with a regular OS, like maybe like Fedora IoT, right, with a couple of binaries in it for doing some of these special things. But it's just a discussion that's begun. It is, we don't have anything there. It's just making me realize that this is like the third time in a month that people have wanted to talk about doing, managing the OS environment at the edge.
Yeah, I think there's a unique aspect that comes into the edge that I've heard discussed, and that is that these are remote, so that you need a scenario, you need to cover these scenarios where you trigger an update and something goes wrong midway. You know, it could be loss of power or maybe a bad update, and end up with something where you either get all the update or none. The ugly scenario is a partial, and then you end up with something out at the edge that people can't go out to repair that isn't workable. So it's stuck in a halfway position where it isn't the new desired version, and it unfortunately isn't even the old one. And you know, it's a challenge that maybe isn't something you traditionally would face in a commercial data center, where you'd have a fallback of a person physically walking to a box to recover it.
Yeah, it's a shame we don't have anyone from Wind River here on the call today. So I guess I can cover what they would probably say. So from that, or you know, to address that particular scenario just you're describing, Steve, there are hardware configurations that have been historically used for things like remote oil pump, where the pump controller, right, is running embedded Linux, and you really talk to it over SCADA and stuff. What's usually done is that in the box, there are two complete sets of hardware, and or one set of hardware and two complete operating system loaded disks. And you try to do an update to the one that's the current backup if you're going to change the OS, and sometimes that means, you know, you're basically just using an image to wipe out the OS and the software that runs on it, right? So it's basically just a disk image. And you try to update the backup and then flip to it. And if you have any problems and it doesn't give you all of the signals that it's booted properly and has all of the, you know, the new information, you just stay on the one you are currently using and you try to update it again. And if it does work, you flip to it, and then you make a best attempt to update the other one that's now become the backup so that that one's updated as well. Or you keep it on the old version temporarily while you do some tests for a week or so. This is how that's handled, because if a pump's 400 miles away from your nearest tech and they're $350 an hour because they're an oil and gas certified electrician that can touch the box, you don't send them out unless you absolutely have to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the techniques I've seen used before are things where you would start up a process that's going to reboot the machine in, say, 10 minutes. The 10 minutes is just some figure you choose to estimate, you know, how long before this update should be complete. And you start changing things in memory only, so that if you take a reboot, it ends up rebooting back into the old configuration. It does mean that you have storage capable of holding double the size of the OS, at least temporarily, to pull this off, because you're going to have a new and an old version stored in your persistent storage. And I believe they use this potentially even for firmware updates, so that, you know, things that would get put into the BIOS updates on computer itself or peripherals could go through this. You flip it over and verify that it's viable, and then you have this watchdog running that was going to kill the whole thing. And if things are good after your update and deemed good, you go kill the watchdog and flip the configuration. But maybe even after doing that, you don't erase the old version just in case there's some later discovery where you want to do a rollback. I think that maybe that Balena OS has some of these features built in. Just like I say, I've encountered it, but I haven't dug deeply into it. But I recollect reading a little bit about that. I'll see if I can find that, but I'm probably not going to find the link to that during this call. But I think I threw it in my massive bookmark list somewhere.
Cool. Bernhard, are there any particular parts of the kernel that you envision being trimmed, cut out, locked up, that you think are not a good fit for the edge environment? Because as you brought this up, you were talking about tuning the kernel.
Right now, I'm just at the beginning of my journey, so I'm not aware of that, but I would start to now investigate that one. If I find some obviously some parameters that should be excluded or cut out or what, or at least reconfigured.
Cool. I can tell you what you probably should not exclude. I've run into this several times with like FPGA boards for the you know, for edge environments like dev kits and stuff, where the Linux OS has been trimmed down. I think it's usually trimmed down for purposes of size minimization. But I get in and some things are locked up real nice, and I feel like, oh, it's got some good security. And then I go and I try to run Linux kernel containers on it, and some module is missing, especially you know, some mappings for doing storage management and these types of things tend to be missing. And then that means that the stuff that operates in the cloud just doesn't work on the board at all, right? It's capable of running my C binaries, and maybe I can get Python on there, but that is something I have encountered on edge boards, is that they're not even suitable for you know, for any of the stuff that we're talking about Kubernetes related. I think they do it not just for size, but also because they have like an onboard flash storage, and so they don't want any of the usual subsystem stuff for doing storage. But it turns out that those layers are needed by all of the kind of the larger scale computing. So as you look into it, just a note to keep in mind is I've run into this about 3-4 times, and I always talk to the board maker, and they always say, well, that image is a perfect fit for the amount of space we had and that type of thing. It's like, well, yeah, but if you can't do what you want with it, right, then that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I've done this at some point recently where I just worked from the throughput perspective, and from that perspective, I had to tweak around the kernel pages and so on. And then I started to rethink, okay, if I'm now increasing the swappiness and these parameters around the kernel pages, then I usually end up in, okay, the operating system now tries to at least just dump the stored data somewhere, and that's it. But this is a nightmare in terms of if I look at it from a security perspective. And if I think, okay, now this runs on a mission critical system, I definitely don't want to do that. So this was my initial motivation for this question. And then I thought, hey, this would be cool, or a good idea for this group, basically. So from my perspective, I'm coming from this cloud environment, and now I'm trying to push my ideas, at least at some point, to the edge devices.
Cool, makes sense.
Okay, maybe we've talked this one out. Anybody else have anything they wanted to bring up? We had a kind of light agenda today going into this, but we've got 10 people here, so I'm sure some people have things that they've been wondering about in the last week.
Kilton, do you want to talk a little bit about the efforts that all just started about integrating IOFOG? And
Sure.
I mean, just to give people heads up, so maybe we'll get more interest.
Sure. Well, we've had a very good amount of interest already, so cool. Yeah, I don't want to always run my mouth constantly at the meeting, but if no one else has a topic, then absolutely. So we've got an effort over at the Eclipse Edge Native Working Group, and this was like, I guess at this point you could say it's like a sister organization to this group here. And so we've got the Eclipse Hono project, and Eclipse Hono, Ditto, and Hawkbit are three focus projects for Red Hat and Bosch and different companies that have built these things. And then, of course, I'm always talking about Eclipse IoFog, which is, that's the edge focus or edge native focused project. And the worlds are colliding, as you might expect, because the Hono was really designed to be the management and authenticated data streams layer, and whatever you put over those streams, is all good, and it's really great for grabbing stuff from IoT devices and so on. And then naturally people are asking, well, could I maybe distribute some containerized workloads to the edge and still use this infrastructure for my data streams that either result or mix it with those data streams? And so we started talking about the integration of these projects. And it's been very interesting because some of the topics that it's brought up are, what infrastructure is the universal carrier? Right, because the IoFog traffic for management has one plane, and then another plane for the actual application data. Well, the application data plane can stay at the edge if you want, or wherever, but for that control plane piece, it normally just assumes you've got some connectivity going on. And we're talking about merging the project such that the connectivity that IoFog edge nodes would use to talk back to the control plane would be over the Hono infrastructure. So in other words, managed by some infrastructure that's been stood up to authorize data flows and know what's going where. So that'll be some cool stuff. Of course, the Hono components are all ready to be spun up with Kubernetes very, very easily. Basically, push button deployment, and then you've got all of this stuff. The only piece that we haven't figured out yet 100% is making it really easy to kind of get all of your edge hardware flashed with the right stuff to bring it up. We've got tools such as like IoFog CTL for doing it easily, but with this integration, we're thinking maybe we could also define an easy way for you to have edge boxes that are off-the-shelf appliances that have some easy way to get configured in. But when you bring in then the other components in addition to IoFog and Hono, but like add in Hawkbit and Ditto, you get these great layers for Ditto's for digital twins, and then and Hawkbit, as I mentioned earlier, is for artifacts and how to make updates to things such as firmware on a constrained device and so on. You bring these together, and what we're starting to amass is a modular but complete picture, a more complete picture. And as we've discussed before, IoFog has some plugins to let you manage your edge workloads using Kubernetes, and we've got a long way to go to make it, ideal, but and more CRD oriented and stuff. But we're working on it as we can. And so we've had some discussions now. I think in both meetings, we've gone the 1.5 hours plus, right? We've done that a couple of times, and there's a lot of folks showing up to ask for particular things that they want to see out of this set of integrations. So everyone is welcome to come to the meetings and hear what what this this integration is looking like, and also bring in requirements or desired features and things as we get this assembled.
So when are these meetings? Can you post a link or give me enough description? I'll type it into Google right now and I'll find it and post the link.
Yeah, I will put the link in the chat.
Okay, great.
Just give me 2 minutes.
All right. If you don't have the notes doc open, I can transcribe it, or you can put it there too. Let me put a link to the notes. Or did somebody else
I have the
already do
document
that?
open. I will add them. I will add the link to the notes as well. And Kilton, I must say you've been modest, because both meetings were over 2 hours, and they've been recorded. So if anyone on the call is curious about getting into that stuff, those recordings are publicly available. So I will make sure to add that to the notes as well.
Yes, we've been talking for a while because, and I think on the last meeting we also said that we will at some point present here a packages project from the IoT, and that's like a complete stack, cloud stack for doing, let's say, traditional IoT. So it's a Hono Ditto Hogbit, so Hono for connectivity, Ditto for digital twin, and Hogbit for device management. And when we first started talking about Edge, we started talking about basically extending the data plane, basically starting to move this connectivity on the edge so that we can connect devices on the edge, not directly to the cloud, but also try to, process data on the edge. But this second phase, so to say, is how to use the other part. So both connectivity, but also the other part of the stack for actually managing the edge infrastructure. So not using it just for the data plane, but also for the control plane where it makes sense. So it's really good.
So Kilton, going back to a comment you said about using Hono for distributing container images to the edge, would this be an alternate to just using the standard workflow of talking to a Docker image registry, or would this be a transport for using a Docker image registry that you would locate at the edge?
So you can use, Hono has protocol adapters that allow you to pass whatever traffic you want. And so if you've got it set up properly, I don't see any reason why you could not use the Hono infrastructure for the pulling of the images. And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong there. I think that's possible, right?
It is, but I think it's so the whole thing would be worked differently. So you would basically have a management software send a just use Hono to send a command between the from the management software to the edge node to update. I think that's at least how Hogbit is doing. And with a URL, and that URL can be HTTP repository, can be Docker registry, or something else. It will just say, you should update yourselves, go here and grab your latest image. And it can work for firmware, it can work for Docker containers, it can work for any other updates. So it's a general system to provide these triggers for things to update and basically agents of where to go and basically get.
So what you're saying is it's more of issuing the commands like a control plane and not the data plane itself?
It can be, it can use the second as well, but I would expect most people would download these things from the existing repositories. We would not force them to do these updates and use the traffic for this, but more like a command and control layer to go through this.
And Steve, the part for managing what container images you're pulling and running them, that's the IOFOG part, and it can be set to draw from n number of registries that you've authorized, which you could then switch over to registries at the edge, or pull from Docker Hub plus private registries. But the part that we've talked about previously, and I've gotten to do just a little bit of work with the folks from the Harbor team, what we've been talking about is being able to extend Harbor such that you're able to pull down a single image down into like an Edge Harbor instance and verify that image is good, and then distribute it laterally such that you only have one pull. And if I had the ability to clone people, or I myself could, stop sleeping, we would be able to implement the Harbor vision for the edge that we've discussed. And as of last KubeCon North America, did some deep diving with folks, and even connected with some folks on the Harbor team to start talking about branching out and integrating, IOFOG hooks and stuff, but then just you know, things have slowed down and other things have taken priority. But if anyone wants to join that work, we could certainly use the contribution.
Yeah, I think I was in that hallway conversation myself.
Yes. Yes.
I remember it.
Right. I knew you remember. Yeah.
I think that, you know, we had concluded that this is a bigger issue than just container images. You know, the whole, when you're at the edge and you can't have deterministic connectivity to some central, you want to end up being able to cache that so that you have it locally. You know, scenarios where you take a power outage, come back, and you're no longer connected to your central repository, yet you need to get that edge location up and operating. And if you're running containerized apps, you need a local cache of the containerized apps, but you may also need a repository for things like firmware and other, we'll just call them blobs or binary objects. And, you know, as a general principle, having something maybe you can put a centralized catalog on the air that does lazy opportunistic replications out to edge repositories that are, one could view potentially as caches of what's in the central.
Yep.
That's a good architecture. And when you think about it, the second move or the third move on the chessboard when you're doing that is that these migrations of large blobs like container images might suck up precious bandwidth. So you want it to be kind of opportunistic, where you might want to have some network policy management enter into this, where your critical reporting of information takes priority over this background thing of kind of batch movements of populating the edge registries.
Yep, and maybe you even have a nice contract with your backhaul provider that during non-peak traffic hours you get you have a lower rate, and if you can keep all of your 800 megabyte polls to happen after midnight, then great. And in that scenario, right, you do your updates overnight and operate during the day when everyone else is. Yeah,
it's almost like the way the world is going with multiple sources of networking and SD-WAN. I could even dream of a world, if somebody had the time to build this, I think they might be able to find users for it, of opportunistically grabbing bandwidth from an auction marketplace to go move this kind of stuff.
One thing not to forget about also is air-gapped environments, for whatever reason, if you have those.
Yeah.
I think it's critical, whatever solution you have, to take that aspect of the equation into account. I was in defense, well, at NATO headquarters, and we were running into that problem all the time because we had distinct networks for secure stuff versus internet connected stuff. And whatever solution you have should be deployable in those environments, because otherwise you are cutting yourself from a big chunk of the potential market there, for sure.
Well, it'd be interesting to make your architecture generic enough that you could use intermittent connectivity, but one form of connectivity might be FedExing a USB flash drive to a location or something like that. You know, that somebody made the comment that the bandwidth of a UPS truck filled with disks is massively higher than.
This would be an official, this would be like SneakerNet as a service.
Yeah.
Yeah, in one way, because, well, I can certainly imagine for air-gap environments that you have some kind of local update server that you, to which you bring on this, new updates and firmwares over the SneakerNet, for example. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's commercial products out there, like I think the Amazon, is it Snowball, physically delivers a server with massive storage to your location. I think it was originally designed to allow people retiring big physical on-prem data centers to Amazon's cloud, and they would ship you this Snowball appliance that would suck everything up into the appliance, and then you physically move the appliance. And it turns out that, compared to maybe if your connectivity available at the location was gigabit per second, that can be dwarfed by physically moving things. So it isn't, I can see doing it for security so that you maintain air gap and really tight governance, because if you physically move things, there's an argument that you can govern it really heavily. But it could also be attractive just from the perspective of being the cheapest available bandwidth if you're not in a hurry.
Yeah, certainly. A multi-pronged approach makes sense there.
I don't know of any open source projects that I've ever encountered to take this on, but it sounds like this might, if somebody was to do it, it seems like there might be users who could use this.
Well, some of our members experimented with that. We have a startup called Galaxy, for example, that they are leveraging essentially either LoRa or -7, depending on the environments. And they have software stacks for both. So I'm not saying they have out-of-the-box features like you are describing, and their product is very niche. They are targeting, they are physical devices you install on valves in industrial plants to ensure that they are the right position. Okay, so it's really a niche market, but a real good one for them. But at the technology level, in any case, they are having certainly that kind of evaluation and multi-pronged networking support in whatever they do. And in any case, I put on in the minutes a whole bunch of links to the discussions that Kilton was referring to before, as well as there's a link. If you use Google Calendar, you can click to just get the invite to our working group meetings. And if you use something else, there's another link, so you can import as an iCal in whatever tool you use. So with that, you should be good to get the invite. And those meetings are public. I mean, there's, even if you're not a member of the foundation, you can attend. It's not a problem.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, super.
I just clicked it. It looks like in my time zone, it's Wednesdays at 11 a.m.
It should be close to this one.
Yeah. I think I picked initially 11 a.m. so that it wouldn't clash with this one, in fact.
So what's the cycle? Is it on today, next week? I see it's every 2 weeks.
Yeah, next one
okay.
is on 27th. And yeah, that's a bi-weekly cadence. And if at some point you wish to share something with the community, you're more than welcome to. So we work exactly like this working group is doing. We have a permanent record in a single document of the minutes and agendas. So if you want to put yourself on the agenda, you're more than welcome to.
We modeled a lot of how to operate it off of the success of this very group that we're on right now.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, to us, those efforts are really complementary in the sense that we certainly have a keen interest in whatever is happening on the Kubernetes side of things, and many non-Kubernetes efforts are ongoing as well. So it's all good stuff.
Okay, thanks. I'll try to make the next meeting and check it out. On the Kubernetes front, the KubeCon Europe event is being converted to online. They've given a block of, I think, about 3 days where the sessions will occur. And we had a deadline to confirm that we were ready to do our originally accepted session, which I did. So Cindy's not on the call today, but I think Cindy and I were the speakers. And I think we still talked at our last meeting about a plan to maybe supplement that with the equivalent of the session. At the physical events, we've always tried to do a face-to-face and maybe had some hallway discussions like the one Kilton was talking about last time. And I'd like to have a venue concurrent with the KubeCon Europe event to try to duplicate some of those things too. And maybe have some special interest sessions that go on. So the event is still off in August, so we have some time, but I'd encourage any members of this group who have things they want to put together as a focus group on a particular topic related to Kubernetes, IoT, and Edge to come up with some ideas so we can get some organization behind it, and maybe get some people to come up with presentations as well as just an outline to get a little bit of focused discussion if we can get people to come on board some online Zoom birds of a feather meetings. I'm not sure how they're going to run it online. You know, there's a lot of these former physical conferences that are using different models of how they go online, whether they do it with a bunch of concurrent sessions you have to choose from, or whether they use the whole 24-hour window, since, you know, being online, they don't have some of the constraints that you would in a physical conference. And the schedule isn't out yet, so I don't know what their intent is. But I did notice that the Linux Foundation has this open source summit conference that is coming up in June. And I was going to enroll in that and just take a look at how that works or doesn't work so that we can use it as a lesson to maybe make our sessions better for the upcoming KubeCon event.
And incidentally, I was on the program committee for that conference, at least the IoT and Edge part of it. And well, there's a wealth of Edge content that has been submitted. Not all of it has been accepted, but yeah, if you have an interest in Edge, I mean, content-wise, there will be some good stuff there for sure. And
yeah, I think Steve already put some links into the previous agenda.
Yeah, that's possible. Maybe I
notes.
missed that one.
Yeah.
Apologies if I'm...
I found about 8 sessions that I was interested. Maybe they weren't entirely IoT Edge, but I found plenty of interesting sessions at that conference. So I was intending to try to catch them. You never know, though. My best hope, I'm often finding that I have conflicts because I have my normal work meetings that might conflict with this, and haven't got my employer to agree that I can act like a physical one where you step out of the office and don't do your day job while you're there.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, still didn't register, but I would plan to do so.
The nice thing is, I think it's much cheaper than the physical one. I think they're asking for $50, and normally the registration cost for a physical one is much higher than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Going on a different tangent, I'm curious about your opinion about this collectively as a group. So I think I saw somewhere that K3S would be contributed to the CNCF, or at least that they wish to contribute it. So what's your take on this?
Well, I've looked at K3S, played around with it. Yeah, the thing is real. I've encountered plenty of people using it. So it's not my role. I think it's CNCF steering committee, I think, approves adoption, but the criteria is often that they're going to look at having serious adoption, something that's one vendor trying to push something over to the foundation, but they don't have users or external contributors. That's usually not viewed favorably. Mm-hmm. But K3S to me looks like they've got the outside contributors and that maybe it's a healthy project and would merit adoption. There's so many things in there now that I think the criteria for entering in, they have different levels, sandbox, incubator. I think if Rancher decides to go that direction, it seems viable that it would go in there. By the way, Rancher, maybe you were in the same call where you said you heard it got announced, and Rancher did have an online presentation on K3S about a week or 10 days ago, and it was a pretty good presentation. Let me see, I might be able to post a link to the YouTube recording of that, but it went into the recently added features as well as some roadmap issues about what they intended to change. And I thought that presentation was good. Let's see, I might not quite have this down. And by the way, for people, there may be people on this call who don't even know what K3S is, but it's kind of a lightweight Kubernetes geared to running smaller clusters. And I think my recollection of what Rancher said in that presentation, but you should watch the original to confirm that I'm right, is that they're no longer going to drop the Kubernetes beta features. They're going to drop the cloud providers so that, but that's kind of that's happening in the general Kubernetes project as well. So Kubernetes used to have these things called cloud providers, which were blocks of code embedded in it to support running on Amazon Cloud, Google Cloud, VMware on-prem, and they were built into Kubernetes itself, and they're being moved out as external plugins. So K3S boots those, and they boot out most of the in-tree storage plugins. And once again, the world in Kubernetes is moving to CSI anyway. So even the standard Kubernetes distributions are going to have these happen. It's only an issue of when, not if. But I think the next release of Rancher K3S is going to keep iSCSI and NFS, and all the rest go out. And then if you needed something that got kicked out, you should be able to use the external implementations. I don't know, did that answer your question, or did it over answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, to me, I didn't have a particular opinion because honestly, I haven't been using it or testing it. I knew that it had some traction for sure. What I wasn't sure about was how much this duplicates or not, you know, what is done in the rest of the community, maybe to slim down Kubernetes for edge scenarios or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think to some extent, some of these other ones, and it isn't just K3S, but Canonical or Ubuntu has their micro K8S, and it's sort of a similar idea of, you know, coming up with a lighter weight Kubernetes, because when you move to edge, you might have physical resource constraints, and you might likely be running smaller clusters compared to the original targeted use case of Kubernetes, which I think were cloud data centers. So in some cases, I think these customized distributions made decisions that even the Kubernetes project itself is sort of adopting some of these, like moving the cloud providers out of tree and the storage plugins out of tree was a recognition that Kubernetes maybe had become too monolithic. And so as a principle, I think it's good to allow variety in the ecosystem. And there's plenty of variety. I think a year ago, there were already 60 some certified Kubernetes distributions. So there is room for this variety, and it's a good way for people to explore tuning the parameters and then let the users decide.
Well, maybe Konstantinos, you've just posted in the chat that maybe you want to give perspective on the driving force behind microcates then, and
Sure.
why it's one of the variety.
So I'm with the microcates team. I agree with everything that you guys just said. There are certain things that would better match the edge case in respect to Kubernetes, and K3S and microcates is working towards these directions, like making the binaries small, making the footprint smaller, a different data store other than etcd, a way to deliver and update the cluster. Perhaps you didn't I didn't hear you mention it, but there is another thing that relates to the way to deliver changes in the kernel, and MicroKids is using it. It's called Ubuntu Core and Snaps. All these are basically solutions towards the edge. They are good fit, if not solutions to the edge only. If you have any specific questions, I can dive in.
Yeah, well, at that general level, since I'm not familiar with either MicroKids or K3S, how would you compare the two, their approach, their feature set?
So, very interesting question. I can tell you what MicroKids is, and in some points how it differs from K3S. So with MicroKids, we don't drop anything. It's the upstream binaries, and now we're trying to add the DQ Lite there. But it's all the features, everything from upstream gets into MicroKids. There is a set of add-ons where that make your life easier. Like you can do MicroKids enable storage, registry, the dashboard, MicroKids enable DNS. These are helpers, I think, in the same sense as the Minikube add-ons that make the developer's life easier. And I'm saying here the developer's life because we have 3 target groups with MicroKids. It's the developer, CI/CD, and IoT devices. The footprint of MicroKids, not the footprint, the package of MicroKids is 200 megabytes. And we have releases from 110 to 118, and we also have pre-releases, like now we have 119. So you can grab any of those in your CI/CD or in your environment and test out what you have. How else do we? Another technical thing is that we don't, contrary to what K3S is doing, the binaries that MicroKids has are completely separate. You find the systemd service of the Kube API, of the Kube proxy, all the Kubernetes services, they are completely separate. That does have an impact on memory footprint, but it's the upstream way of shipping Kubernetes. What else? I told you about the snaps. You get automatic updates, like the same day the upstream Kubernetes releases now 118.3. You will get within the same day the new version running in your system. And we also make sure that this upgrade happens transparently, like you don't see the change. Perhaps you will notice a blip, but that's it. What else?
Well, one thing I'd like to recommend, you had that great demo of MicroKids at the meeting earlier this year. So I just posted a link to that in the chat.
Yeah,
But
have a look.
I think maybe, at this point things move so that, what was that, February? So the more recent version might have improvements since then, but I thought that was a great quick overview of, what it can do and what's in there.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, thank you so much for answering my question, Konstantinos, and thank you for the link, Stephen.
It's a pleasure.
So it looks like it's 10:03, so our hour is up. Maybe, like I said, I had a personal interest in Kubernetes hosting of home automation that we didn't get to, but maybe we can roll that into the meeting in the APEC thing. And as usual, if other people want to put topics on the agenda, please do it. It allows people to prepare, and if I can get some lead time, like a week or so, I can often go out and recruit speakers. So if somebody, you don't have to volunteer to talk about a subject yourself. If from a user perspective, there's something you're curious or interested about, go put it on there, and you can challenge the group leaders to go out there and find content for you. So unless anybody's got anything last minute, let's wrap this thing up.
All right. Well, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye.